But look at where Kamala Harris is today. She's only leading by 9 points. That would be the worst Democratic performance in a generation.
A 29-point drop in terms of that gap there on which party Hispanics identify with in just 12 years.
All right, Kamala Harris is not in a very good position right now as we're leading into the final home stretch for this election. Forget about all the hype you might see. Forget about all the headlines that you might be reading that suggest that she's doing really, really well. Maybe in the national polls, but even there, she's only about a 1-point lead right now in most of the national polls. Democrats need to do a lot better than that nationally against Republicans, because Republicans notoriously don't do well in national polls. But also, when you break down not just state by state, but also demographic group by demographic group, she is historically bad right now compared to the last several Democrat candidates that we've had in the last several elections. Let's throw it over to CNN so they can give you a quick breakdown here with regard to how Kamala Harris does with labor union members identifying as members of labor and how they're voting in this election.
But look at where Kamala Harris is today. She's only leading by 9 points. That would be the worst Democratic performance in a generation, 10 points off the mark of Joe Biden, who, of course, won 4 years ago, was sort of that union guy, Union Joe, right? Won it by 19 points. She's 10 points off his mark, and the worst in a generation.
Worst in a generation. And here's why it's super important. Keep looking at that graphic. Yes, Joe Biden did plus 19 points with labor, and that was enough to barely give him, well, what was called a victory. Let me put it this way. He was declared the winner of the 2020 election, but just by this much. And where did that margin of victory come from? Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, because there's a lot of organized labor in those states. Who lost those 3 states? Hillary Clinton. Look at Hillary Clinton's numbers. November of 2016, plus 12. That's only the difference of 7 points between Clinton and Biden. And that was enough from labor to push Joe over the top, presumably. Now look where Kamala Harris is. She's running 3 points behind Hillary Clinton. And again, it's all about those 3 states. That's a disaster. An absolute disaster for Kamala Harris and for her campaign this close to Election Day. But there's more. When you further break it down into racial, ethnic, and age groups, Kamala Harris is in big trouble, mostly because Donald Trump is doing historically well. Let's start with Steve Kornacki over at MSNBC and NBC News talking about the Latino vote. That's right. The Latino vote and Donald Trump, because, you know, Donald Trump hates Latinos. He's racist. He's xenophobic. Every time a Democrat wants to pander to the Latino vote, they talk about, unlimited migration and get rid of the wall and open borders and amnesty for all and citizenship. Well, that's actually having a boomerang effect on Kamala Harris with Donald Trump. Watch.
We see every 4 years the Latino vote becomes a bigger and bigger share of the overall electorate. Well, among Latinos, our poll shows Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump 54 to 40%. Now, for some context, this is a little bit better for Democrats than they were doing among Hispanics when Joe Biden was their candidate. But I think the bigger story here is historically, 54 to 40 now is a 14-point advantage for the Democrats. Take a look back at the last 3 presidential elections. And these were the results in the exit polls among Hispanic voters. That 14, look at that cut there, almost 20 points less than just 4 years ago. And 4 years ago, we were saying Donald Trump had made inroads with Hispanic voters. This suggests that that has continued.
Yeah, it sure has. And let's just look at those numbers real fast, because it is extraordinary. Barack Obama in 2012, plus 44. With Hispanic voters, and it's degraded since then. Hillary Clinton, again, losing the election in 2016, and she dropped 6 points with Latino voters. Now, in 2020, Joe Biden did worse with only 33 points with Latino voters. Wasn't as big a voting bloc as it is right now. So the number of Latino voters grows right now, and that lead has now been cut in half for Democrats compared to where it was in 2020. Why is this? Well, I'll tell you why this is. Because Latino voters are just like Black voters and Asian voters and white voters and whatever other ethnic or racial group you want to throw in there. They don't just vote on one thing. Democrats have taken them for granted and put them into this little box. They say all Latino voters care about is increased immigration from Latin American countries, amnesty, no borders. They look at them like they're some sort of stereotype, some kind of cardboard cutout. Well, Latino voters are real human beings that have complex concerns about everything that affects them in our society, including crime. And guess who's suffering the most from criminals coming across our border and being given amnesty in this country, or the ability to live in this country despite their criminal records back in their home country of Venezuela or Honduras or whatever? Guess where they're committing crimes? In those Latino communities, where Latino American citizens who have been naturalized and vote are suffering the most. And Democrats are saying, yeah, we're going to bring more of these criminals in. Well, Latino voters don't care about the race or ethnicity of the people who are wreaking havoc in their neighborhoods. They just want it to stop. And Republicans are serious about stopping it. They also care about the economy. They also care about their wages. And they also care about abortion. A huge percentage of those Latino voters who have come to this country and gotten their citizenship and are ready to vote, they are faith-based, family-based individuals. They are Catholic, they are Christian, and every single time Kamala Harris goes out there and promises everyone that abortion will be legal right up until the moment of birth, which is the position of the Democrats. They won't say it out loud. But you ask any Democrat what limits they would put on abortion, and they will not answer that question because they don't want any limits on abortion. Their only answer is it should be between a doctor and the mother. They won't even use the word mother. They'll use birthing person. Latino voters are absolutely repulsed by the Democrats' position on abortion. Latino voters are absolutely repulsed by the Democrats' position on LGBTQ agenda being injected into our public schools and being forced down the throats of 8-year-old kids in elementary school. And once and for all, Latino voters don't like being called Latinx, which is what Democrats insist on. Every single time the woke agenda makes its way into the basic talking points of Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and every other Democrat, it actually does more to move that number away from the Democrats and towards Donald Trump than anything else on the table. More from Kornacki here, and how the Latino vote is actually quite possibly a wild card in this election for Republicans.
We ask a basic question of Hispanic voters. Which party do you more identify with? 37% now say Republicans, 49% say Democrats. But again, look at how this has shifted in just the last dozen years. In 2012, this was a 41-point advantage for the Democrats. It has come all the way down to 12 points, Kristen, a 29-point drop in terms of that gap there on which party Hispanics identify with in just 12 years.
Now, there's another interesting little boomerang that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have thrown, and now it's whacking them right in the face as we're 5 weeks out from the election with regard to the Latino vote, and that has to do with geography. See, in those other years that you're looking at, 2012, 2016, the Latino vote, yeah, it was somewhat significant, but it really didn't make that big of a dent in the Electoral College because the vast majority of these voters were going to be in California, in New York, or Texas. Set aside Florida for a minute, because some of those states, actually, Florida was affected by this. But in those other three big Latino population states, New York, California, and Texas, even if the numbers swung in a huge way for Democrats, it didn't make that big a difference because Democrats already had California and New York, so who cares? And Republicans had Texas, so who cares? But here's the amazing irony. For the last several years, the Democrats have made a concerted effort to airlift Latino voters to other states, to Midwestern states, to Pennsylvania, to Virginia, to Georgia as well. Arizona, of course, has a huge Latino population, as does Nevada, and to North Carolina, to Ohio, to Michigan, to Wisconsin. They were thinking that they were going to turn those states bluer, right? And when newcomers, as they like to call them, would cross the border and then get moved there, oftentimes family members that are already citizens in other states would move there, help them out, blah, 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 right? So as the racial and ethnic makeup in those battleground states actually change and they have an increased Latino population, look, while that's going on, at the very same time, party affiliation shifts from 12 years ago, 21% of Latinos identify as Republican. Now it's 37%. It's almost even, 49 to 37%. So ironically, in their cynical attempt to change the electoral makeup in some of those states that had been traditionally shifting Republican to try to lock it in as Democrats, they've actually been moving Latino voters there who now are identifying as Republican. What sweet justice that would be if that's the case. This is a very big deal, you guys. You don't believe me? Because, listen, I wear my politics on my sleeve. I'm a Republican. I want Republicans to win, okay? So obviously, I'm going to give you these facts and then give you my analysis from my perspective. So now let's look at the other side of the coin. Jonathan Capehart. This guy, as much as I'm a partisan Republican over here on Town Hall Media, Jonathan Capehart is a partisan left-wing Democrat over on MSNBC. So after he broke down these numbers on the Latino vote, take a look at his expert, sober analysis from his left-wing liberal Democrat perspective.
Yes, that's a big lead, but it's a shrinking one. Down from what might seem like a big lead, it's a shrinking one because President Biden had a...
Dude is short-circuiting on live television. Dude's brain is melting down. He unlike me, he reads a teleprompter. Like, he's got to give you analysis that's already been pre-written for him, and he can't even do that because his brain is melting down at the ramifications of the Latino vote leaving in droves from Kamala Harris and from Republicans. Watch it again.
36. Yes, that's a big lead, but it's a shrinking one. Down from what might seem like a big lead, it's a shrinking one because President Biden had a 36. Yes.
That is an on-air freakout from a partisan Democrat who, as he's reading the words on the teleprompter, realizes how much trouble they're in. All right. But the problem for Kamala Harris goes well beyond that. First, this is an amazing leaked video from a Zoom call among fundraisers focusing on Michigan. Elise Slotkin, one of the top-ranking Michigan Democrats. I think she's on the Kamala Harris campaign committee. She was caught on this Zoom call talking about the reality on the ground based on internal polling in Michigan. Say what you will about Elise Slotkin. She knows Michigan politics. What does she think about Kamala Harris's position in that state?
I'm not feeling my best right now about where we are on Kamala Harris in a place like Michigan right now. We have her underwater in our polling.
Underwater in their polling. Private polling is always better, by the way. The parties and the campaigns always have superior polling. They pay more money for it. It's much more scientifically done than the popular polling that you see from media outlets. Her response, and again, she's in no position to, downplay their success or failure in Michigan. I mean, if anything, her job is to be as runny and as rosy and sunny as possible. And she's there saying, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. Let's hear her say it again.
I'm not feeling my best right now about where we are on Kamala Harris in a place like Michigan right now. We have her underwater in our polling.
And by the way, that relates to our very first clip we looked at, which shows the historic generational shift here with regard to labor voting, UAW, Teamsters, and other private sector laborers. Kamala's still locked in the government worker labor vote, SEIU and AFSCME, et cetera. But for real workers, real Americans who are members of unions, they know exactly what's going on here. A couple more graphics for you to look at. Back to the Latino numbers, by the way. This is age gender splits on Latino voters in particular, I want you to look first at the age difference. Bottom line here, all the way down at the bottom, that's 65 plus. In 2020, 67% of Latinos over the age of 65 identified as Democrats. They've dropped 10 points down to 57 points, and Republicans, an exact same number, 10 points from 27 to 37. But then look at the young Latino voters. This is huge. The next line up from the bottom, ages 18 to 34. In 2020, 18 to 34 Latino voters, 66% identified as Democrat, almost the same as the senior citizens. That has dropped an earth-shattering 15 points. Now, only 51% of Latino voters 18 to 34 identify as Democrat. Republican numbers shot through the roof from 22% up to 41%. But that's not even the biggest story. Look at the top line of this graph. This shows you men. Now, it's a big shift here, as in 2020, Latino men identified at 54% as Democrat. Now it's down to 47%, which is dead even with Republicans. And everyone's looking at that number. Everyone's looking at that number saying, look at Latino men now are even as identifying as Democrat or Republican. It's a huge shift from 54 to 47 Democrat, 34 Republican to 47 Republican. That is a big number. And I know everyone out there, when they're analyzing those Latino registration numbers, they're looking at men. But for a second here, look into these numbers, because in my opinion, the real hidden story here with Latinos is Latino women. Women in general are voting Democrat in this election. If you're a married woman, you're more likely to vote Republican. It's almost 50-50 if you're married. But if you're a single woman, that's the one voter base that Democrats can really count on right now. Single women, black single women through the roof. But look at this number for Latino women. You guys, this is a huge hidden number, a hidden story. If you look at women, Latino women, in 2020, 71% of Latino women identified as Democrat, only 20% identified as Republican. Look at the shift to 2024. Yes, 60% of Latino women now identify as Democrat, but that's down 11 points. 11 points from last election. But even bigger, look at the growth of Latino women now identifying as Republican. 4 years ago, it was only 20%. That's jumped 14 points in just one election cycle. Now, 34% of Latino women identify as Republican. That's actually, if you look, that's the same number, that's the same percentage as Latino men identified as Republican 4 years ago. A 14-point swing, you guys, for Latino women. That's devastating for Democrats. I'm telling you, they can't survive. They cannot survive with those numbers. One more poll, this one specific to one of the battleground states. This is the latest poll out of Pennsylvania. Last I checked, kind of an important state. If you look, Susquehanna polling, that's a very reputable polling firm, right now shows it as dead even, 46 to 46, as you can see from the graphic. Why is this important? So what? It's a dead heat. This is huge because the last time they did this poll in late July, Kamala Harris was leading by 4 points. By 4 points. In just 2 months, Kamala Harris got that 4-point lead, that big boost that she got when she was named, when she was coronated, when she was anointed as the Democrat nominee without actually having to run in a primary. She got that huge shot out of the cannon, and suddenly, according to this poll, she was winning by 4 points in Pennsylvania. That lead is gone. This is after she had her convention. This is after she had 2 months of undying love from the media without, well, please, it's 3 months. It hasn't stopped, the undying love from the media. It's after the debate that everybody told you was a game changer. Kamala Harris won it going away. It wasn't even close. She's had nothing but good press coverage this entire time. She's had her convention. She had her debate. And now, after the people of Pennsylvania have gotten to see Kamala Harris and get all of this rosy coverage of her, she has lost 4 points in this poll, and it's now dead even. Again, devastating. To put it in perspective, 5 weeks before the election, 4 years ago, Joe Biden was showing like a 5 or 6 point lead. 8 years ago, Hillary Clinton had like a 4 or 5 point lead in Pennsylvania. We know that both of those leads evaporated. 8 years ago, Donald Trump ended up on the winning end in Pennsylvania. 4 years ago, it was close. It was within a half a point, and Joe Biden was declared the victor. Right now, according to this poll, Kamala Harris dead even in Pennsylvania. One last poll, one last one. This is the latest one from Atlas Intel Polling. It's a good one. It's ranked 2.7 out of 3 as political polls go. Look at the battleground states. Michigan, Trump plus 3.4. Pennsylvania, Trump plus 2.9. Wisconsin, Trump plus 1.5. Arizona, Trump plus 1.2. Georgia, Trump plus 0.6. Only North Carolina and Nevada right now showing Harris in the lead, 2.4, 2.8. That's not good. Trump wants to win and should win those states, but he can afford to lose them if he's sweeping all those other states. In other words, according to this poll, if the election were held today, your map would look like that. That's a Trump victory. That's a Trump easy victory. That's Trump winning by drawing to an inside straight. That's with losing North Carolina, a state that he probably should win. Now, listen, I know that was a lot of numbers. I know it was a lot of analysis. I know that it was a lot of, graphs and all that. Bottom line, if you're Donald Trump right now, running for the third time for president, after all the lawfare, after all of the January 6 hearings, after all of the indictments, after all the kangaroo courts, after all the bad media, after all of the convictions, after all of the lies, after the disgusting debate debacle from ABC News and the slanted debate that they put on, and after the chicanery of removing Joe Biden from the ticket and then just placing Kamala Harris in there, after all that, if you're Donald Trump right now with the numbers you've got, you are a very happy man as you head into the next 5 weeks before Election Day. And if you're a Trump supporter, you should be pretty happy right now, too. Be happy, be hopeful, but be vigilant and act like you're 20 points down. I'm talking to you. I'm also talking to Donald Trump.